Hi, good day, everybody. I'm David Popler here at the HBSC Leadership Institute in Northern California. I'm here with Chris Hornick today, author and entrepreneur, and he's the founder and CEO of HBSC Consulting, where he's been helping drive strategy and digitally transform Silicon Valley companies for the past 21 years. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining me for this conversation today. I'm looking forward to talking about the book.
Hi, David. Great to talk to you.
Good to see you. So first, I'll throw you a softball. I have to ask the question about the title of the book. Why is this the last book of leadership?
Well, ironically, this is probably the last book of leadership that was actually written without the help of ChatGPT. So, that's one thing. That's kind of the irony of it.
Yeah.
But, it's also sort of the time commitment that it takes to write a book of this nature and research it and, really kind of look at all the past literature over the last, 300 years or 400 years on literature that's actually been produced here. And some of it actually dates back about 3,000 years ago as well. So it's really been quite a journey to go through this. But, the serious reason why this is actually called The Last Book of Leadership is that my goal was to actually create a book that was based on first principles. So what are the first principles of leadership? And if you would actually get down to the core of what leadership is, then you would only need one book of leadership to read, and it would actually paint a picture of sort of the reality of leadership. So, potentially this could be the last book of leadership that you really need to read if you're only to read one.
Well, great. Well, so give us a teaser summary. I was intrigued right from the beginning about a unified model. Give us a summary. What are the components of that unified leadership model?
Yeah, it's a great question. At the first level of the model, really, there are 5 key foundations of leadership. The first is context. And context is very important. Basically, if you don't have sort of situational awareness and self-awareness, and you don't have a strong leadership identity, then that's actually a very huge challenge right off the bat for leadership. But the other 4 are really vision, wisdom, power, and then outcome. And really, across my career and the interviews, we interviewed 40 people for this book, 40 executive leaders, from different walks of life. And, really all the problems that we'd actually sort of, gone through and that interview process and all the problems that I've sort of dealt with as an executive management consultant, they've always fell into like one of those 5 categories. And so really at the top line, those are the challenges, those are the challenge areas, I should say, that leaders struggle with. And so that's the foundation of the model.
Great. Okay, so what's the high level takeaway? You did all this research, you wrote the book. What really makes leadership work? What makes leaders really work well?
Yeah, and I think that, an important component and an important idea to keep in mind is that leadership is context-based. And so, like on one side, you could actually have sort of the dictator, commander, ideologue, type people who basically are leading with authority. And that's appropriate for one context. And then on the other side, you have sort of the visionary spiritual leaders and even including the martyrs of the world on the other side. And that's really leading by inspiration. And so really, any model that is actually valid talking about leadership has to actually speak to both the authority side as well as the inspiration side. There's a lot of literature out there today that actually only wants to focus on the authority side. But, in reality, we all know as leaders, having been through many different scenarios, that some of the toughest challenges to lead through is really when you have to sort of allocate scarcity across a group because times are tough, right? And so those are the challenges. And so really any holistic model that we talk about that's unified would really be able to speak to both sides of that, equation.
That's interesting that there's that balance there. Something that I'm keenly interested in terms of its value in leadership is just simple trust and building trust and earning trust and then using that to actually be successful in a leadership position. And I picked up some of that from the book. And any thoughts or guidance to the listeners about how trust plays a part in successful leadership?
Yeah, I mean that's a great call out. I mean, leadership wisdom, the foundation of leadership wisdom is really establishing trust with your team, because leaders don't really necessarily accomplish things themselves. They always accomplish things through others. And really to actually have a leader with strong followers means that they implicitly trust them. And for that trust to actually come about, there's really three things they need to, have and sort of demonstrate. So first of all, they need to have character, and that really is around, the people who are following the leader. They need to recognize that the leader has good intent. They care for them. They have conviction for what they're about to do, and that they have complete clarity and can communicate that clarity to their followers. And then also on the character side is you need integrity, because if you don't have integrity, really no one's gonna want to follow you. And so honesty, unselfishness, fairness, those are sort of key foundations of building leadership trust. The other aspect of that is competency. So really having the capability and generating the results, that's critical. So nobody wants to follow a leader that is not as competent as they are. And so certainly if you don't have competency yourself in that particular domain, or you're not a subject matter expert, then a lot of times the followers do not trust you as much. And then the last factor is really around presence. And so presence actually has this notion of generating confidence and you demonstrating courage and showing strength and perseverance, and then also connecting with people. And so really, if you have sort of leadership presence and you connect with people, you really have something that's incredible. You have the respect and adoration of your team, and that generates trust. So that's how the model defines leadership wisdom, and it is the core of leadership.
It's powerful. Yeah, I agree with that, and it's powerful. Something else that I really like about the book is that it brings a historical component. It's really engaging in that it goes back and it looks at prominent leaders and impactful leaders over time. So for me, that made the book that much more engaging, because there was always a storyline there that went with what you were trying to learn. But what did you learn? Again, you had to go back, you went back and you looked at all of these leaders through history. Anything you'd like to call out in terms of what you learned about how leaders changed or how they stayed the same throughout history? What did you see as the common threads?
Yeah, I'd have to say in that regard of what I've learned is that the evolution of leadership is fascinating. If you really look at sort of the barbarism and sort of the tribal times that we actually have lived through, humankind has been around for about 300,000 years, in our current states, Homo sapiens. And really, about 300,000 years ago, people lived in primal family units. And so that was like very small groups, like 10 to 15 people, sometimes 20 people, depending on the size of the family. And then basically, it started to form the basis of leadership where, it actually became tribal. And then, there's 100 to 150 people.
Right.
And so there were certain elements that were necessary to basically manage a group of about 150 people. Then a bunch of warlords came along and realized that, life is dangerous and we have to band together, and, critical mass is absolutely essential for survival. And so the warlord leaders were actually born, and they could manage, an order of magnitude people more than the tribal leaders. And so hence, if a tribal leader was going against a warlord leader, obviously the warlord leader won. And, then basically, about 300 years ago, really came about the ideological leaders. And so we're talking about, like the Stalins, the Hitlers, the people who are actually promoting some type of ideology, whether it's fascism, communism, socialism, any of the isms, right? And they were pushing their agenda in that regard. And so that actually, ideology is very effective for unifying people. And, that was actually millions of people they could actually unify around, ideology like that. It was very effective for motivating people and pushing agendas, right?
Those jumps of orders of magnitude, basically. Yeah, that's
it's
really
common belief.
amazing.
And really, when we talk about ideologies, it's really having a common historical belief. It's having definition of a common set of values and a common set of ideals. And so really, when you actually get ideological leaders, they can unify people, but it can also be dangerous. And the reason why ideological leaders are actually dangerous is that if you have sort of a anti-human or, a difficult agenda for that, where you want to have a divisive, ideology, So if your vision is the vision, I always say, so if you want to divide people, ideology is very effective for that. So it can really be used to unify people or, for great disaster. And so that was actually effective at, unifying, tens of billions of people. And then, most recently, about 30 years ago, we recognized the fact that diplomatic leaders, really, we just don't want to have global warfare like we had in the past. I think we learned some of our lessons, at least, that we don't repeat that. And so diplomatic leaders came out about 30 years ago. And then now we're coming to a period of unified leadership. And really, like, unified leadership is where mankind has a realization that, it's not the Republican Party, it's not the Democratic Party, it's the human party. Yeah. And so basically, like the ability for everyone to sort of come together and unify and realize that the problems we have are really humanity based and can only be solved by shared leadership at the humanity level. That's incredibly hard. And so that's really what I think we need to get to, today in today's world. And, and the interesting part about this is that you've even seen signs of this, is that the future generations of leaders, maybe 30 years from now, are really going to be universal leaders. And the universal leaders are the ones who actually
interplanetary?
Yeah, you think it may be interplanetary, we don't know. But the universal leaders are really leaders who push for unity, but they also intelligently push for, disruption. And they disrupt things that aren't working in the world. And obviously we're evolving as a people. And so really that combination of unifying people, but also pushing for disruption, for intelligent disruption, that's actually sort of this evolution. And I haven't even touched on sort of the ability of AIs now to lead and what that would look like.
That's the next book. Yeah, leadership in the world of AI. Well, hey, let's move from the historical component to the scorecard concept that you have in the book. Something else that really makes the book stand out to me is that you've taken your model, you've taken all these components of leaderships by which you measure these leaders, and you've actually given a scorecard to all the prominent leaders in the book.
Yeah.
So really making it kind of actionable to compare these leaders. So could you take a minute and just explain a little bit about the scorecard? And then, of course, everybody wants to know who came out on top. Who are the couple of leaders that really stand out? So tell us a little bit about the scorecard.
Yeah, well, so the scorecard is a tool that you can actually use to benchmark yourself. And so it's sort of a leadership development tool. It can also be used as an assessment tool. And, the important part about that is that it actually does ask you questions across the 5 foundations of leadership, but it also categorizes where you're strong, where you're weak, and then basically based on your leadership type, and you and I talked about the various leadership types, offline, and I know you took the test as well. But based on your leadership type, certain skills are actually more important than other skills. So, for instance, like if you're a civil rights leader in the 1960s, it would be very important that you actually have outstanding communication skills, that you are of good character, and that basically you have competency leading people inspirationally. And so you can see that, like, when we actually looked at Martin Luther King from the scorecard perspective, he came out stellar in very specific areas. One of the interesting things about Martin Luther King is that he wasn't actually super strong on the power, foundation, because literally he was leading so much through inspiration and personal power and ethical power. He really didn't have any positional power that had tremendous sway with people. He just did everything, through inspiration. And so really it was kind of fascinating. But, to answer your question about the leaders that we looked at historically, the standouts were really George Washington, tremendous, just fearless leader, incredible vision, bringing people together, doing the right thing, and just absolutely stunning, leader. The fact that he survived the 7.5-year war and beat a much stronger enemy was absolutely phenomenal. So he's kind of one of my heroes. I think the other one is, also Abraham Lincoln, kind of showing up, being a stellar character and also just basically being true to his values. And so he was a very values-based person. And, he was up for ending slavery. And he was saying that really we are attached to the future. We're not tied to the past. And so really a very progressive leader in that regard. Another one who comes to mind is Angela Merkel. And these are all these leaders I'm talking about right now all turned out to be 5-star leaders. And that's the highest you can get really in our model. And Angela Merkel, just amazing coalition builder. People trusted her. She showed, leadership capability across a wide group of, varying cultures. And she was always known for doing the right thing and always trying to look for the greater good as opposed to just for what was important for Germany. And so just the absolute stunning leader, across the board on these scorecards. So it's a fascinating thing. So when you take a look at your scorecard and you compare it to some of these other leaders, if you wanted to emulate them, you would obviously work in a specific categories to emulate their leadership.
Well, that's what I like about it, because I've read a bunch of leadership books too. I'm keenly interested in leadership and improving as a leader. And what I found with the books is that a lot of them focus on one type of dimension or another type of dimension, and they're all good ideas. But I always thought, boy, it would be nice if all of these different books were kind of combined into this one type of model. And I noticed that you picked out for your favorite leaders a couple of American heroes that were in politics and also another international leader. But another thing I really like about the book that really resonates is that there are leaders in business, there are leaders in government, there are leaders in sports, there are leaders in faith. And when you look at what these leaders have in common, you can really learn a lot about how to be a better leader, how to be a great leader, how to mentor leaders that you want to make better leaders by looking at all of them across the board. So not just let's look at a handful of CEOs because we want to be better business leaders, but you can really look at a Tom Brady and a Dalai Lama, right? And compare, well, what type of leadership did they actually need to excel at in order to be successful at what they did?
Yeah, those two examples that you gave, are a wonderful contrast, really, because if you look at Tom Brady, he's the proverbial team captain, right? And if you look at Dalai Lama, he's the proverbial, spiritual leader.
Yeah.
And so really based on their values, they would lead in very different ways. And based on their context, Dalai Lama is not trying to win a Super Bowl, right? And so when you start to take a look at that, he's really all about, sort of reincarnation and not living for this particular generation, really looking at, 100 generations down the line about how his actions will, impact that. And so, when you look at Tom Brady, he's looking at, right in the moment, getting a high performance team to accomplish a very real time goal. And, it's very different leadership types. And I've always said that basically, if your leadership model does not actually speak to the Tom Brady's of the world, to the Dalai Lamas, to the Vladimir Putins, and it doesn't really kind of encapsulate how they lead or why they lead in that regard, it's really not necessarily a holistic, unified leadership model.
One dimension by itself won't be all that helpful long term. I completely agree. Okay, well, Chris, quickly, I'm going to put you on the spot. Leadership expert. At the moment, who is your favorite leader through history?
It's interesting. I think that many leaders have actually impacted humanity at so many different levels. And, so if I were actually to say who's the most influential leader that I have ever read about, it's an interesting answer, and I probably will surprise you. It's really Jesus Christ. And one of the reasons why I say that is because if you really look at him, he was the proverbial first documented servant leader out there. And, it's interesting that we have all these books right now about being a servant leader and, sort of leading through inspiration and sort of worried about, like the people and really doing good and love and everything like that. And that's just a beautiful example of, of leadership. But what I will say is that he was such a spiritual leader that unfortunately he became a martyr for his faith. And obviously, he was executed by the Romans, as everybody knows. And but you can see that his leadership was very powerful. However, he didn't live past 33 years old, right? So, there were sort of elements to that story which are somewhat difficult. And that also proves the fact that if you are leading 100% through spirituality and you could wind up a martyr, which is not a great outcome.
Yeah,
But
but
I would say
inspiring. Yeah, but
the other thing I would say
inspiring.
about Jesus was that if you look at Catholicism right now, it is the largest religion on the planet, right? So the impact of a servant leader, not in his own generation, but like 2 millennia later, it's still the largest ideological institution in the world. So you can see the power of servant leadership.
Yeah. No, that's powerful and a little bit surprising, but totally makes sense. And I agree about servant leadership can really be some of the most powerful. Lastly, I just wanted to say I really appreciate your book because our world really needs more strong, well-balanced leaders more than ever. As we watch the news and we see how history unfolds, I think that as we have more well-intentioned, powerful, well-polished leaders, that will have a huge impact on our future and future of humankind. So I appreciate you being with me here today. I actually have my copy right here, and I highly recommend it. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Chris, and thank you so much again for joining me for this conversation. Good luck with the book and with what's going to follow with the classes and the speaking engagements. And I look forward to speaking with you about it again soon. And we'll talk to you soon.
It's always a pleasure, David. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks.
Okay.